Does Deontay Wilder hit harder than Francis Ngannou? And why is the answer probably yes? I've literally been obsessed with this question ever since I saw this post on my Instagram feed, and apparently when I posted this to my community poll, it was also very highly contested. The results of the poll was very close, with Deontay Wilder taking a slight lead with 56% to Francis Ngannou's 44%. So today I wanted to answer this question and find out who truly is the hardest puncher in the world. But before I begin, I want to address the elephant in the room, which is that Francis Ngannou is the current record holder of the hardest punch ever recorded. This was set back in 2017 in the UFC Performance Institute on a machine called the Power Cube, but the problem with this record is that Deontay Wilder has never hit this machine. So instead, in this video, I have to crunch the numbers myself, use some physics, and also compile as much evidence as possible to try to find out if Deontay Wilder truly does hit harder than Francis Ngannou, and I think the results may shock you. So when I first tried to answer this question, the more I realized how hard of a question this is. The first and most obvious problem is that we're comparing a boxer to an MMA fighter. In boxing, they usually use 10-ounce gloves, while MMA fighters in the UFC use 4-ounce gloves. This makes it hard to directly compare Deontay Wilder's power and Francis Ngannou's power, as the bigger surface area on a boxing glove is going to hinder Deontay Wilder's power. The second problem I ran into is defining what a harder punch truly is and what unit of measurement I should use to compare the two's punches. Initially, I was going to try to calculate Deontay Wilder's punch according to the Power Cube, but the more I dug deeper into the actual machine, the more I realized how vague they are in calculating the power of a punch. So if we go back to Francis Ngannou's world record punch that was set on this Power Cube, he recorded 129,000 units. But units of what? This Reddit post does a really good deep dive on the Power Cube and basically shows that their units are very vague, and shows that the way they quantify the power of a punch is not even disclosed to the public. So without this information, we need to quantify what a harder punch is. So to calculate what a harder punch is, I decided to use force. And as defined in a high school physics class, is basically a pull, or in this case a push, from a punch that changes an object's velocity. So to calculate force, it's mass times acceleration, and one thing to note from this formula is that mass is only one part of the equation. So as it pertains to boxing, a bigger person has the potential to punch harder, but that doesn't necessarily mean the bigger person will punch harder. So take for instance Eddie Hall, who is a famous strongman and recently turned boxer. In a video on his YouTube channel, he punched the same Power Cube, and despite being around 360 pounds, much heavier than Francis Ngannou, he only got 113,999 units. I know I said earlier we shouldn't be using the units of a Power Cube because of its vagueness, but the company does claim that they account for force, and I think it's pretty safe to assume that Eddie Hall does not have more force in his punch than Francis Ngannou. But this also means that Deontay Wilder has the potential to punch harder than Francis Ngannou despite him being much lighter. So this brings us to the second part of the equation. Why couldn't Eddie Hall punch harder than Francis Ngannou despite him being around 80 pounds heavier? Well, it was because he was unable to accelerate his punch as fast as Francis Ngannou. Acceleration is the rate of change of a velocity over time, which in this case is how fast a punch can reach a top speed in a short period of time. So to increase the acceleration of a punch, you have to improve your technique and form, and also make good use of body mechanics. This roughly includes turning your hips correctly, extending your arm correctly, and twisting your fist all at the same time to maximize the acceleration of your punch. So now that we have the formula down for force and we understand mass and acceleration, how can we calculate the force of Deontay Wilder and the force of Francis Ngannou? So I found this really cool calculator online which calculates human punch force through inputting the body weight, punch speed, delivery time, and surface area of a puncher. So for body weight, I decided to input the highest weight they've ever weighed in at. For Francis Ngannou, this is 263 pounds. For Deontay Wilder, this is 238 pounds. We'll come back to punch speed and delivery time, but for surface area, I kept it constant, as we want to find the force of their punch regardless of whether or not their hand is covered by a boxing glove or an MMA glove, in which a boxing glove has more surface area than an MMA glove. For delivery time, which is how long it takes a punch to reach its target, I averaged the delivery time of the 5 most devastating KOs of each fighter and averaged how long it took to deliver their punch. For Deontay Wilder, it took about 0.2 seconds to deliver his most devastating punch, and for Francis Ngannou, it takes about 0.25 seconds to deliver his punch. For punch speed, which is how fast the punch is going, I couldn't find a good way to find the velocity of a punch accurately, so I set it constant for now. And for my Deontay Wilder fans, I know you're probably screaming he has a higher punch speed, but I'll show you why in a second why setting the punch speed constant for both fighters is actually extremely impressive for Deontay Wilder. So here are the results. Despite Deontay Wilder being around 30 pounds lighter, only 0.05 seconds faster in terms of delivery time, this resulted in over 1,000 more newtons in human punch force. Now please take these results with a big grain of salt. I'm no Isaac Newton, I made a lot of assumptions and I kept a lot of things constant. There's also a lot of potential problems when it comes to how I reach this calculation. For instance, when I calculated delivery time, I just went frame by frame to see how long it took for one of these fighters to deliver their punch, and I could be wrong there. I also decided to take the heaviest they weighed in at, assuming that this would equal more mass, and assuming that they would continue to accelerate the same, which would then mean more force, but I could be wrong there. And there's probably a whole slew of problems that will definitely be mentioned in the comments, but roughly speaking, this is still really impressive for Deontay Wilder, considering that he weighs much less than Francis Ngannou, and we also kept punch speed constant. If I had to guess, he probably does have a higher punch speed, and he was still able to punch harder, or at least with more force than Francis Ngannou, despite keeping his punch speed constant with Francis Ngannou's. But enough of this nerd stuff, let's go straight into the fights and see who truly does hit harder based on the eye test. So for Francis Ngannou, some of his feats of power include his iconic knockout of a 250-pound Alistair Overeem with a picture-perfect uppercut. He's also rocked a 234-pound Stipe Miocic with a jab. He dropped a 260-pound Curtis Blades with a right hand that wasn't really landed clean, and he slept a 242-pound Rosenstrike with a left hook. Now this sounds really impressive, but when we look at Deontay Wilder's feats of power, it's a different story. He knocked down a 269-pound Tyson Fury multiple times throughout their trilogy. He also slept a 250-pound Helenius on the back foot, and he also slept a 230-pound Artur Szpilka with a laser right hand. You also have to consider that Deontay Wilder did all of this in a 10-ounce glove, which is absolutely insane. So even though my calculations are far from perfect, and also the examples I just gave are probably very subjective in terms of how you want to see them, I think I'm pretty confident in saying that Deontay Wilder probably hits harder than Francis Ngannou. And even when you strip away all of the evidence I tried to show and all of the math I tried to do, if you think about it for a second, it should make sense that Deontay Wilder hits harder than Francis Ngannou. Deontay Wilder is the professional boxer here. He's probably trained and sharpened his punches to an absolute T to deliver the most possible force he can achieve. Meanwhile, Francis Ngannou isn't training boxing all day. He has to work on his wrestling, his jiu-jitsu, his clinch work, his Muay Thai, so obviously he doesn't have the time to perfect a punch like Deontay Wilder does. So if you couple this logic with the rough math I did earlier and also the quick eye tests we did comparing their knockouts, this makes for a solid argument for why Deontay Wilder should be able to punch harder than Francis Ngannou. But I think the cruel joke about this question is that this can easily be solved with Deontay Wilder going to the UFC, Performance Institute, or anywhere with a power cube and just punching it with his full force. But until then, we can never know for sure. So what do you guys think? Does Deontay Wilder hit harder than Francis Ngannou, or is it the other way around? Thank you guys for the support on all of my videos, and I'll continue to upload consistently. Peace.